My name is Kalina Montez. Today is April 3rd, 2017. The time is 6 o'clock, and we are at St. John's Northwestern Military Academy. I am interviewing Mike Weigl, who was born on June 16th, 1923 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and served in World War II between 1943 and 1946. Michael Weigl was a sergeant in the Army and served in the 3rd Squad, 1st Platoon Company, 271st Combat Engineers Battalion. This interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. So Mike, what were you doing before you entered the service?
I was working at E.O. Smith Corporation, and I was a tool and die apprentice. And I was there, I started there the 10th of September of 41. And then Pearl Harbor came December 7th. And then after that, we were doing a lot of defense work for the Army and the Air Force. I applied for a deferment so that I wouldn't have to go into the service because we were doing a lot of work. But the people at the draft board thought I would do better if I was in the service. So then I was rejected as far as being deferred, and I went into the Army then. And I went into the Army in February of 43, and I was discharged March 14th, 1946.
And why did you pick the service branch that you joined?
I didn't pick it.
Oh, you didn't pick it, okay.
It was, they thought I would do better in the Army.
Okay.
So,
Okay, and do you recall your first days in the service?
yes, I do.
What did it feel like going into the service?
Well, everybody in my home city of Milwaukee, all of my friends were already in the service. And so when I was called to go, I was kind of glad because then I wasn't, it was a nice experience, I thought it was anyway.
Okay. Yeah, and where did you go for training?
After we went from Milwaukee to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and there we were processed. And then we were transferred to Camp White, Oregon.
Okay, and could you tell me about your early weeks of training and how you adapted to military life?
Yes. Can I show some?
Yeah.
I was, the part that I was assigned to was it was called the Heavy Pontoon Battalion. And they made pontoon boats, and they could use them to cross rivers with boats, or they could use them to build bridges with a lot of these pontoon boats connected. And then because it was a heavy pontoon battalion, that meant it could transport trucks and tanks to cross rivers.
Okay.
And that's where I got my basic training.
Oh, okay, so what did you learn to do with the boats then?
Well, we just did my basic training there, the 12 weeks of basic training that everybody had to go through. And so we did that. The thing was, I also came down with chickenpox while I was in my basic training. So I missed a lot of things that the troops did while I was in the hospital. But anyway, we got out of the hospital, and then it wasn't a short time later when we finished our basic training. And then because I was really not too good, my strength wasn't there for being part of this, because there was a lot of heavy lifting and stuff. So then I was transferred to a unit called the Army Specialized Training Program. And that was a program that was the Army sponsored a lot of soldiers, and they went to different college campuses to do their training. And I was assigned to Stanford University, and I was there from June of 43 until about June of 44. And then I was assigned to the 71st Light Infantry Division. Am I going too fast? No.
You're
Okay.
fine, keep going.
All right. And when I was at Stanford, we did a lot of engineering. That's where my qualifications were, anyway. Then after that was terminated, so that we could now go into combat, into areas that they needed us. So then I was transferred to the 71st Light Infantry Division. And by light infantry, it meant it was like the 10th Mountain Divisions. I don't know if you heard those. That was a very, very noted division. And they went into mountains, and because of that, they didn't have any trucks as such, so they had mules that they transported all their equipment. I wasn't there very long, and then the people in Washington decided they didn't need a light infantry division, so we were made a regular infantry division, which meant we could have all the things that a regular infantry division has, which is artillery, all the things that go with a regular infantry division, which are 3 regiments of infantry. They had quartermasters, they had combat engineers, everything that made up a regular infantry division. From Stanford and California, I was transferred to the 71st, of course, and then our 71st Division was transferred from California to Fort Benning, Georgia, which was an infantry training base for a lot of people, including paratroopers and such. But because I had my basic training in an engineering department, I was transferred from regular infantry to the Combat Engineer Battalion of the 71st Division. And that's where I had a squad. I was the squad leader because I had gotten my sergeant's stripes. And I was the leader of the 3rd Squad, 1st Platoon. And there were 4 squads in the platoons. Platoons went to companies, and then companies went to battalions. So we trained in Fort Benning for combat, and we were there about 6 months. I don't remember the time anyway. But then after we went through our training, we got a short furlough so that we could go home. And then when we came back, then we went to Brooklyn, New York, and we boarded troop ships there, and we went across to France, and we embarked in Le Havre, and we were assigned to, at that time there were different camps, and they were like cigarette camps, they were called. Camp Old Gold, Camp Lucky Strike. And there we did training for our service in combat in Europe.
What kind of training did you do there? What did you learn to do?
Well, it was more or less what we would do in combat and how we would go about it in that area.
Okay.
And
And could you share with me an example of strong leadership you encountered during your service? And you said you were sergeant. What kind of things you did fulfilling that duty?
Well, because I had gotten my sergeant's stripes in the infantry regiment, and then I was transferred to the engineering, I kept my stripes, and so I was automatically a squad leader.
So how did you earn the stripes to become a sergeant? What qualified you
Well,
for that?
when we were transferred in California, we had different trainings as infantry. And of course, because of the fact that it was going from a light infantry division to a regular infantry division, they needed a lot more people. And so I got to be a sergeant that way.
Okay, awesome. And
I
then,
didn't earn it that much, but
Okay.
I was lucky to get it.
So you said then after, you said you went to France, right?
Then we went to France, yes.
What did you do there? What were your duties there?
Well, we did not much training because we had already trained a lot.
Right.
But we got all our equipment together, and then we were sent from these camps right at Le Havre area to the combat areas around. The area was Alsace-Lorraine, which is the area between France and Germany. And yours, sometimes it was French, sometimes it was German. And so we went in there, and that's where we started our combat. Then we liberated, I think the first city we liberated was Beirut in France, and part of the Alsace-Lorraine area. And at that time, we were also part of the 7th Army. And after we did some combat in that area, then our division was transferred from the 7th Army to the 3rd Army, which was General George Patton was the commander of that. And then we were near, I think it was Mainz, France, yeah, and that was right at the Rhine River. And so then we crossed the Rhine River, and it was by chance that the way we crossed was the group that I took my basic training with as the 555th Heavy Pontoon Battalion. That's how we crossed the Rhine River. Once we crossed the Rhine River, we were in Germany. And then would it be okay if I read?
You can read some.
This was just a short thing that our general wrote at the end of the war. And he just said to all the members of the 71st Infantry Division, the war in Germany is over. Before we turn to a new mission, and the new mission was we were going to go to Japan as the invasion of Japan. That's where we were slated for. But he said, before we go there, he said, I wish to extend my heartfelt appreciation to the members of the division from the day you left your concentration train in Le Havre in a period of 92 days. You have recorded fighting a large part of the way, a distance of 1,060 miles. You have captured over 30,000 prisoners of war. The bale of the miles. You have captured, this isn't very clear.
That's right.
From the day you were committed with the 7th Army in the Battle of Ditch with the 4th and the 15th and the 12th Corps. There has been no break in the effort. Historic miles are emblazoned on your memories by the bears of the division. You were crossed through the Siegfried Line to capture Pirmasens. Now, the Siegfried Line was similar to what the Maginot Line was in France. And they did this after World War I so that people couldn't go in. And it said that we went through that to capture Pirmasens, which was on the other side of the Siegfried Line, which you did without faltering. Your advance continued to the Rhine, where the record of your valor was written in the blood of brave comrades at Steyr and Germerskagen. Another change in the direction transferred this division from the 7th Army to the 1st Roving 3rd Army, where you were thrown across the Rhine to cover the rear of the 12th Corps. East of Hanau, you were confronted with the hard-fighting elements of the 6th SS Mountain Division of the German Army, which you destroyed through every battle of the division, costly, smooth, together as a team. On through Fulda and Ursingen, constantly opposed by small fighting groups of the enemy, which you did not permit to delay you, seizing Augsburg and Bayreuth in your path. A transfer to the 10th Corps gave you new missions, which we swept southeast to Waldem, Saalbach, and Augsburg. You crossed the Regen River at Regensburg, the Danube at Regensburg, the Isar at the Inn Dam, the Inn on the Dates east of Bremen, which was secured only after vicious fighting and major labors of our engineers. We stopped only at our objection, the River Rhine, but with particular patrols thrusting deeply into enemy territory at Tollenford and Amstetten. The easternmost point recorded by Americans ground forces of any U.S. Army in the European theater. You have refused to let fatigue, physical obstacles of mountains and rivers stop you. The enemy has only delayed you temporarily. You have written a glorious piece in the military history of our beloved country. I am a veteran, proven in battle. May you continue to live up to the high standards you have set for yourselves, whether it is in further battle in Asia or in an occupational role in Europe. I salute you. And that was our General Wyman. He was the Major General of the United States Army. I thought if somebody asked me what I did, I think this letter more or less kind of put it all into a nutshell.
Right, that's amazing.
And I wish the printing would have been better, but
That's all right.
it's been old, so.
Wow. So in regard to all that you had done, what do you consider to be your most important contribution during the service? Out of everything, what would you say?
Well, I did get the Silver Star, and I think that's what I thought was pretty nice.
Yeah.
The thing was, when we were going through Europe and we got to the Inn River, there was a dam that the Germans used to generate power and stuff. And they had a lot of these dams along the river. And our infantry went across the dam and captured that. But the dam was already ready to be blown apart, so we couldn't cross it. And they had aerial bombs and things that were right on the dam, ready to go off. And Sergeant Weber, who was the first patrol of our infantry, and I was the third patrol, we were assigned to go and inactivate this so that they wouldn't blow it up. So we went and we found the bombs, and they were suspended by cables, and we had to cut the wires so that the demolitions wouldn't go off. And then we cut the wires or the cables that were holding these dams, and that was it then.
Yeah, how did you learn how to do all that? Was that all in training that they taught you?
That was part of our, yes.
It was, okay. And during your service, did you feel pressure or stress from all that you had to do? How did you get through that?
I guess I was too young to feel stress.
Okay, okay.
You didn't know any better.
Could you contact family back home when you were in service?
Well, we could write letters, and I have some of the, I don't know,
Yeah.
I just kept some of the letters and things that and it was, the thing was, you wrote, and there was a special type of stationery, and can't even think of the words anymore, but they were condensed into such so that we could mail them back and forth. And of course, they were censored that we didn't do anything that would jeopardize our units or something. So we couldn't tell them where we were, but we could still write them and say we were okay and we did this and that. But yeah.
So you had spare time to write letters, that they gave you time to do all that?
Yes.
And what other things did you do when you were off duty, when you didn't have to do anything else?
Well, when the war was over, then there was a policy that said you couldn't fraternize with the Germans because they were the enemy at the time. Even after the war we were given, but that was something that wasn't very, we didn't abide by it too much. We got to talking to the Germans. We had them do things for us. They did our laundry, they did our cooking, and so that we had a lot more time.
You said they did your laundry and cooking. When was that? When did they?
Well, that was right after the war was over. See, after we crossed this dam, then we were in Austria, and we went through Austria into a town called Steyr, which was a little bit below Vienna. And that's where we met the Russians. They were coming from the other direction. And a week after we met the Russians, then the war was declared over. So then after that, we were in the Army of Occupation, and we had a lot more time there.
So you said the Army of Occupation. What was that? What does that mean?
Well, the Army of Occupation was all the forces that were with the Allies. the United States, the British, the French, all of, and the Russians, they occupied Germany. And they did a lot of rebuilding at the time because Germany was just a lot of rubbish, more or less. If you would go into a city, you'd see some walls that were just standing and nothing was left of it. So after the war was over, then we started rebuilding and furnishing the people with food and clothing again. So that was part of our argument. But we were pretty strict in that we shouldn't fraternize with them or with them. And I'm sure if you had a relative or something at the time, they would know what that was.
So you said you helped after the war was over. What kind of things did you do?
Well, after we met the Russians and the war was over, about a week later, we were transferred to the city of Augsburg, which was a lot farther west of where we were. And that's where we spent time building the different things. And because I could speak German a little bit, I had a pretty good job doing that. So.
Where did you learn German? How did you?
My father was born in Germany. He was from Munich. And my mother was born in Switzerland. And when they came over to the United States in 1910, and I was born in 1923, so they taught German.
Okay.
And I just, like kids talk English when they first grow up.
Yeah.
So that's how I learned. I never went to school, but I knew how to talk German.
Interesting, very interesting. Going back to when you were serving, did you know what was going on in the world and with the war while you were in service?
Well, we knew some of it. Of course, we were busy going from one town to another and stuff, but yeah.
Where did you get the news of what was going on?
Well, it was usually an Army newspaper called the Stars and Stripes. That was very popular, and all the Army people
So you had access
to that. Yeah, it was.
Okay, very interesting. Did you know that the war was coming to a close?
Yes, we did.
You did.
Because we knew once we went through Germany and went into Austria, there was no other place to go because the Russians had conquered the other part of all Europe. And so they were more or less waiting for us to come in when they met. And I think this was part of the things that Churchill and Stalin and Roosevelt did when they were in Yalta and all these places, that they decided what would happen after the war was over.
Do you recall the day that your service ended? Do you remember what was going on, what you were doing?
When?
When the day that your service ended, the last day of it.
When my service ended, when I was discharged?
Yes.
Do I remember it?
Yeah.
Very well.
Tell me about that.
Well, I got back to the States, and I was for I think a day in Pennsylvania. Then I took the train to Wisconsin, and there's a big Army camp in Sparta, I think it was, and that's where I was discharged. And then when I was discharged, then I went back to Milwaukee.
Yeah, and how did you readjust to civilian life? Was it hard coming back?
No.
No.
I was discharged on the 14th of March. 14th of April, I got engaged to and then on the 14th of September, we were married.
Okay.
So in that 6-month period of time, I had a pretty nice time.
That's good. And when you returned home, did you go to school or work?
Then when after I went back to A.L. Smith, and I completed my apprenticeship as a toolmaker then. And
interesting. And with the friendships, did you make friendships in the service? That
Yes, I did. And especially in my engineering company, like I was the squad leader of the 3rd Squad, and Sergeant Weber was the squad leader of the 1st Squad. And the two of us didn't live, he was living in Illinois, and we were living in Wisconsin, so we did communicate there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What are some life lessons that you learned from the military service?
Pardon me?
What are some life lessons that you learned from the military service after you came back? How did that affect the rest of your life? How you looked at
Well,
things?
you got to obey orders, so married life was easy then. I don't know, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to show me, or what else you would like to tell us about?
Do we have enough time?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, this is a picture of the, when we first, the heavy pontoon battalion.
Okay.
And this is a diploma I got when we finished our training at Stanford.
Very interesting. And what about any other medals that you'd like to tell me about?
Well, this is the cap I wore, and because it had the red braiding on it, that meant I was in engineering.
Okay.
And these were my dog tags. And this was a symbol of our division, the 71st Infantry. And this is my sergeant's stripes. And then we also, while we were going through Germany, I picked up a few souvenirs, and that's where this Nazi armband came, and also this medal too.
Mhm.
And of course, this was the Silver Star we got that when we captured this dam.
Right. And what about your conduct medal?
Well, that was more or less just a medal you got if you got honorable discharge, which most of us did.
So what does that mean then?
Well, when you get when you're out of the service, you either get an honorable discharge or a dishonorable. A dishonorable one is if you're a deserter or something like that, or it wasn't honorable.
Okay.
So all of us got this good conduct medal, and this was my for the rifle range. I was a sharpshooter. That's what that was.
Okay. Are there any other stories that you'd like to share with me about your service? Anything you could think of?
Well, when I go back and I had completed my basic training as a for the 555th engineering, and then after I was through basic training, then I went to Stanford, and I went from one extreme to another. It was just like going from hell to heaven, because we were right on the campus of Stanford, and we had all the wonderful things that were there, even though there were enough Army people there, so we could still have our companies and do the Army things, but we were basically engineering students.
Mhm.
And that was a wonderful way to spend Army life.
Very awesome.
But it didn't last long enough.
Yeah. Do you have any stories that you remember of different things that happened with the friends that you made there?
I still, there's one, we were in little rooms while we were there, and I was in Encina Hall at Stanford. And then we had rooms, and every 2 or 3 rooms there was one of the fellows that was in charge of it, so that we got to go to different classes and make sure we did this and that and stuff. And George Stoyer was native of Wisconsin, and he was part of the, like a little company commander. And so he and I communicated up until about 2 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, and he's around Madison, so.
Okay, very interesting. Are you in any veterans organizations now?
Yes, I'm a life member of the American Legion. I'm a life member of the VFW. And I did belong at one time to the Catholic War Vets, but I don't belong to that anymore.
Okay. And what would you say to someone today thinking about joining the military?
Well, after we got married, we had 5 sons. 3 of my sons were in the service. Steve was in, and I was at the Vietnam era. My son Steve was stationed in Vietnam, and he got it wasn't the Silver Star, but it was a Bronze Star. He got the Bronze Star when he was in Vietnam. And because he was overseas, then his brother Earl was stationed in North Korea, or South Korea, I'm sorry. And he spent the time there, and then because Steve and Earl were overseas, Michael was stationed in Arizona, so he kept in the States. But so there were three of the 5 boys were in the service.
Very amazing. Yeah. That's incredible. How would you describe the rest of your time served? Was it an honor serving in the Army?
How would I describe?
Yeah, was it an honor to serve? Did you enjoyed your?
Was it an honor?
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
It was.
The thing was, because my dad was born in Germany, his brothers were in the German army during the First World War. And so I also had a cousin that was in the German army, and he was he was in Russia, and so he never came home again. But yeah, so we had different things, and because my mother was born in Switzerland, we had relatives in Switzerland. And after the war was over, then we communicated again with them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us and for sharing just all of your service and things that you did. So in closing, this has been an interview of Mike Weigl regarding his service during World War II. My name is Kalina Montez. The time is 6:39 p.m. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your service.
Thank you for your interview. It was wonderful.